What is up, YouTube? It is Best Takes Jaron coming at you for the first time on YouTube with the Best Takes poll. These are my 25 teams that I think deserve to be crowned top 25 in the country in order. I've also coming at you with the first six out, the first six teams that I think deserve a spot if one of these 25 were to slip up. These are all resume-based rankings. I think this far into the season, we really have a great vibe for what these teams look like, who they've played, how they match up against other teams, and that's why they're on my list. Let's get straight into it with our first six out. As for my first six out, I've got three teams that are all G5 teams, undefeated, but haven't played a Power Four and haven't really impressed me with their opponents yet. That's going to be UNLV, Navy, and Northern Texas. Now, North Texas is playing Southern Florida this week. That's going to be a great matchup for them. We'll see how they match up against a team that is pretty proven so far with wins over Boise State, Florida, and only loss coming to Miami, who I think is one of the best teams in the country, if not the best. We will see later on. Now, as for Navy and UNLV, still got to wait on their Power Four performance. How do they play against the big dogs? If you're a G5 school, that's my only barometer on you to know if you're really about it. Then we've got Utah, Illinois, and Iowa State, all three teams that have faced losses to pretty good in-conference opponents. I think Illinois probably has the stake at having the best loss out of the three, except for the fact that they got beat by 53. I think Indiana is probably the best opponent that any of those three have faced, but they got smoked. They got rolled. They got put in a pack. Okay? That's what happened to Illinois. So Illinois, you don't quite get the 25 spot. As for Iowa State, I think that's a good loss to have if such a thing exists, and they do on rankings, of course. But there's just too many teams that were deserving of top 25 spots to include Iowa State on this list. As we get into our top 25, we're going to start off with 25, work our way up. We've got Virginia. Virginia, very good win against FSU, and now a very good win over Louisville. I think those are great. You're at 25 because you lost to North Carolina State. That's atrocious. That's a bad loss to have this early in the season. It's not that I think that that's going to affect the outlook on Virginia moving forward. Virginia might be that team. But now their best loss has even been degraded a little bit by Florida State losing. That's a two-loss team now. Now, I think Virginia has a real shot at the ACC championship game, and that would make their way into the playoff. But it's hard for me to see them getting an at-large bid with the schedule that they play. Number 24 and number 23, I've got Memphis and South Florida, both G5 schools, and I think they're very impressive this year. Memphis is undefeated. Their best wins against Arkansas, which I think is a pretty good win. Being undefeated after playing a P5 or a P4, that'll get you in my top 25. Now, for South Florida has better wins than Memphis. They still have that loss to Miami. I think it'll only look better by the week. Number 22, I've got Cincy. Cincy with a great win against Iowa State. They've really turned this program around. Scott Satterfield has done a great job with this team, making sure that he doesn't lose his job this year. Nebraska, of course, at 21, they have to be ranked ahead of Cincy. They have the head-to-head. And by the way, Nebraska looks pretty good. Their only loss right now is to Michigan, and we're going to see how I feel about Michigan later on in this poll because I think that Michigan is a good loss to have. 16 through 20 teams. Number 20, I've got Notre Dame. Notre Dame hasn't impressed me all that much this year, to be honest. That's why they're sitting this low, despite having only lost to Miami and Texas A&M, two very good teams. They just don't have the wins to rectify them being higher yet. Will they eventually get there? They might. Now, do I think Notre Dame's a playoff team? I don't. I don't think Notre Dame can possibly find their way into the playoffs unless it's just inherent bias because they're Notre Dame, because they're a big name and they sell tickets. And maybe that's what the playoff committee wants to go off of. In part, they definitely are. They usually do. But I don't think that you should be a 10-2 team, especially not this year, because I think we're going to have a lot of 10-2 teams that deserve that at-large bid. I don't think you can be a 10-2 Notre Dame and your best win be USC, assuming you get that. Your best win's USC and still make the playoffs. That's just my opinion. Unless you're a conference champion, that's kind of hard to rectify. At number 19, I've got ASU. ASU's only loss right now is to Mississippi State, and I think that's a pretty good loss, especially as the year goes on, especially being in the Big 12. I think that's a good loss to have if you're ASU because they're going to knock off a team. I don't have them in my top 25, but Mississippi State is going to knock off a team this year that is unexpected, at least from their standards. They also have great wins over TCU and Baylor. I think that's enough to qualify them back in there in this top 25. I think they deserve their spot. Number 18, I've got Vandy. Vandy's 5-1. Their only loss is to Alabama. I think they're a very good-looking squad, especially after that Bama game. I think that was very impressive. Their defense showed me things that I wasn't sure that I was going to see from Vandy this year. That's impressive enough for me to have them in that 18 spot, despite their best win only being South Carolina. South Carolina really hasn't showed us that they are up to snuff as what they were last year. Number 17, I've got BYU. BYU hasn't impressed me that much with the strength of wins that they have. I mean, I think their best win is Colorado. That being said, they're still undefeated, and there's not a lot of those left out here in the college football world. A lot of these teams are 1-loss or 2-loss teams, and BYU's undefeated, so you need to be on the list, especially considering that they're a Power 4 school. They have Power 4 wins. They need to be on the list. Number 16, I've got Washington. Washington has looked very impressive this year. I think that their offense is very impressive. Their defense is a little lackluster, but they still held Ohio State to 24, and that's their only loss this year. They just came off a comeback win to Maryland, who isn't a bad team at all. A fourth quarter comeback, 21 points straight. That's huge. That's what I like to see out of contending teams. Moving into my 11 through 15 schools, I've got Georgia Tech at 15. Georgia Tech also undefeated, so I think they deserve their spot. That being said, they've got a very shaky win against Clemson, who has turned out to be a terrible program this year. And then what's their best win after that? Wake Forest by 1 point. I don't really like that much. They're going to stay at that 15 spot. I don't think they deserve any more. They might not deserve any more for the rest of the year because they're not going to play anybody until Georgia. So you'll have to look out for them Georgia week, but that's about all I've got for them. Michigan, I like at this 14 spot. I think they're a very good program this year. I think they're figuring it out offensively. The defense has always been there. It always will be with this program. Seems like it is year in, year out. They're adjusting to having a quarterback that knows how to throw the football. I think that's huge for them. They've got a very good schedule looking forward. I don't see very many losses left on that schedule, if any. Number 13, I've got Mizzou. Mizzou has looked the most impressive out of the backfield this year. Ahmad Hardy has done absolutely special things, and Bo Perbula has shown his worth. I bet you Penn State really wishes they had Bo this year instead of Drew Aller. I think Mizzou has looked very impressive. They've got to play Alabama this week. That's going to be a huge matchup to really prove to me that this Mizzou team is legit this year. At number 12, I've got LSU. LSU has looked pretty impressive against so-so teams, and then they've lost now to Ole Miss. It's hard for me to rank LSU and know what they've done. At the end of the day, they have more Power 4 wins than teams that are below them, but I don't know how much I value those Power 4 wins at all. With the loss to Ole Miss, that's kind of bad, but I think Ole Miss is a pretty good team this year, so I don't think it's the worst loss you could have coming into this week. You've got to play South Carolina this week, and I think that's going to be another proving ground on if you can really put away these mid-tier opponents. Number 11, I've got Tennessee. Tennessee's a field goal away from being a top 5 team probably with a win over Georgia. They're going to hold on to this 11 spot until they get a worthwhile win. You'll get it in Alabama if you do it in a couple weeks. But until then, you've got to hold on to the spot with your best win being Mississippi State. I'm very impressed with this Tennessee squad. I think their offense is way better than I thought they were going to be leading into this year. The defense is so-so at times. They showed so against Georgia, which is really going to hold them back against an Alabama team here in a couple weeks. But we shall see with this Tennessee squad and see what they can do because you can never really predict that Tennessee-Alabama game. Moving into our top 10. Georgia is my number 10 team. Lead this far into the season. If your only loss is Alabama, you're looking pretty good in life, okay? Georgia has looked good offensively. Their defense has shown not that much ability to get stops against better offenses. So we're going to see how Georgia looks moving forward. But as for now, they don't have the resume. They don't have the wins to prove to me that this Georgia team is all that they're cracked out to be preseason-wise. Number 9, I've got Texas Tech. Texas Tech has looked by far the most impressive out of the Big 12 to me. Their defense looks legit. It looks like they could contend with some SEC or Big 10 schools. It wouldn't surprise me at all. I think that they're a clear shot to win the Big 12. They've looked the best by far out of the Big 12. At number 8, I've got Indiana. Indiana with 2 impressive wins, going on the road against Iowa. That's a huge win. And then beating Illinois 53 points is crazy. Because I thought that Illinois just wasn't a good team after that game. That's how bad they beat them. Then Illinois turns around and beats USC. So it turns out that's not a bad win at all. That's, in fact, a very good win against a good Big Ten school. So, Indiana, you're doing well. You got to come to Oregon this week. That's going to be tough for you, but I think that you can get it done. I may be one of the only believers in Indiana this week, but I really think that Indiana may be able to shock Oregon this week on the road. Number 7, I've got Alabama. Alabama's only loss being Florida State is pretty tragic whenever all things are considered. I've been impressed with them from the standpoint of last year to this year, but over these last 2 weeks, they've really shown that they still have some flaws that they need to iron out in order to be a true contender. Nevertheless, you still have that win over Georgia. Georgia's holding their own. I like that. Alabama looks good this year. They should be a contender in the SEC. Speaking of which, number 6, I've got Ole Miss. Ole Miss has one of the better resumes in college football, if not for their opponents just not living up to what they were supposed to be. I mean, they've got wins over Arkansas, Kentucky, LSU, and Tulane, which I think are 4 really good wins to have. They do have to go on the road to Oklahoma. They have to go on the road to Georgia. I think those are going to be 2 very brutal games for Ole Miss, but we'll get to see how much of a contender they really are. And then finally, moving into my top 5 teams in college football. Number 5, I've got my team, the Sooners. And I like to think as objectively with this Sooners team as I can, because the offense really hasn't been to my standards what I think it should be with John Mateer, but you got to take it how you can get it. And defense has absolutely been the MO for this team. They are absolutely cracking teams down. They are locking them down. They look absolutely phenomenal. One of the best defensive teams in the country, if not the best. To me, Oklahoma could probably flip-flop with Ole Miss. I think they're very similar in resumes at this point, but I think very highly of their win over Michigan, and I think very highly of their win over Auburn. They're going to Texas this week. This is proving grounds. This is going to be national media attention. This is one of the best rivalries in sports, and you've got to prove it if you have John Mateer or you don't have John Mateer. That defense should be able to get him through. Number 4, I've got Oregon. Oregon holds his number 4 spot and not any higher because Penn State went on the road to UCLA and got beat by a very bad UCLA squad this year. Now, the real test is going to be against Indiana this week. In my opinion, that Indiana team looks to be a better team than Penn State, which I don't think a lot of people would have predicted going into this season. Number 3, I've got Texas A&M. Texas A&M just bolsters the resume even more. They beat down on Mississippi State. They beat Notre Dame, and they have beat Auburn. I think those are 3 really good opponents to have on your resume. I think that they look like they have one of the best resumes in college football. I'm going to hold them at this 3 spot. A few more games, and they might just jump. Number 2, I've got Ohio State. Ohio State has looked very dominant in the opponents that they've played. My only knock to Ohio State is they haven't played the same level of opponents as some of the other people that are in this top 5. To be very honest with you, they really haven't. Up until this point, their best win was Texas, and then Texas went on the road and just lost to Florida. Did not look like they were in that game at all. So that win doesn't look quite as good. You have the win over Washington still, and I still think that's a really good win. However, you're getting a little bit of favor from me because you won last year, but I don't know how much longer I can keep. It's hard for me to consider Ohio State's rest of their schedule in there with some of these other teams that are playing much more difficult opponents, regardless of what they did last year. That's one thing that I've had a lot in my live comments is people are saying that Ohio State deserves it because they won the Natty last year. No, man, this thing is way different. These teams are way different. The difference between one year and the next in college football this year compared to years prior is huge. It's miles. Florida State wouldn't have touched Alabama last year. They came out week 1 and got the win. Florida State already has more wins than they had last year. Oklahoma's chasing that. They're pretty close at this point. So I don't think that you can use years prior results to justify having them higher this year. At least in my opinion, I don't think that that's a good way to look at college football, even if it wasn't how it is. I think that you should be going off this year and this year alone, and you got to prove it to me this year in order to be my number 1 team. That's just my opinion, though. Some people feel different. That's fine. Number 1 team in the country. Miami has the best resume in college football right now. Wins over South Florida, Florida State, and Notre Dame. There just aren't 4 better wins on anyone else's resume. You can say that those teams aren't as good as what some people are saying, but if you're an Ohio State fan, I don't think you can say that because Florida just beat Texas, and they whooped up on Florida. South Florida beat up on Florida. Florida beat Texas. I mean, those are impressive wins. Notre Dame is finally building their way back up into being a better team. Notre Dame, from a power ranking standpoint, is probably a top 10 team. We're not going off power rankings, though. That's why Miami, I think, has played the hardest schedule. They're still undefeated, and they deserve the number 1 team in the country over an Ohio State that necessarily hasn't proved it the same way. I think Ohio State's been dominant, but I don't think that that really matters to me all that much until you play a better opponent. They'll have Penn State here in a few weeks. Even that isn't looking like it's going to be a crazy quality win for Ohio State. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you stuck around till the end, leave me a like, drop me a subscribe. You might enjoy this content. I've got more coming on the way. It's OU Texas Hate Week. I'm going to be dropping a few videos about that. Maybe we get into the history of everything. Maybe we get into how these 2 teams stack up this year. Can Texas turn it around against OU? Can OU continue the streak? Can their defense survive if they don't have John Mateer? I'm going to be talking about all of that this week. So make sure you're subscribed. Hit the notification bell if you really want to. Let me know how I did on these rankings. Thank you very much. Peace.